welcome to AI Searched. You've done so much in the field of AI and advancing this community from a research point of view. Telling me a little bit about how you got into it and how you started your career doing this.
First of all, thank you so much for having me here. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. So I work broadly in the space of AI for science, and I like to think about how what is happening right now with machine learning and artificial intelligence can be beneficially deployed in the scientific community, so that scientists find it as a useful tool. But my journey itself, began a long time ago. I've always been fascinated by and passionate about science. I actually wanted to be a scientist when I was growing up, but then the maths became too difficult for me, and I was really interested in physics. I studied physics in my undergrad, but I could not go on to pursue it. But then technology was also a passion of mine. I have been coding since very, very early in my life, and I decided to pursue a career in technology. So uh, I worked in technology consulting. I worked in product management, building different kinds of products using AI and machine learning. I spent almost 10 years at Google doing different kinds of things in product and strategy. But at some point of time, I realized that I now want to combine these two passions of mine once again. And is there something that I can do where technology can be used to help science?
Mhm.
And that's where I started working as a part of Google Cloud, where I was leading solution development for research computing. So essentially, building things on top of Google Cloud that would be useful for scientists and researchers that are primarily working in academia. So scientists who work in universities and government labs, how can we help them use the latest tools and technology? And then I did that for some time, but I realized that I need to get an insider's perspective of what the real challenges on the ground are, and what are the pain points that scientists face when they are working in a university. So I joined the University of California, where I've worked as a part of their research computing team, so helping students and faculty and researchers use the latest and greatest tools and then solve their technical issues.
Cool.
And while I was doing all of this, for the last 5, 6 years, I've been tracking what has been happening with AI and machine learning and its impact on science. And it was becoming very clear to me that there's a new paradigm that's emerging when it comes to the scientific method itself. I think machine learning and AI as a tool are becoming very, very important for scientists and researchers across all disciplines. AlphaGo was an aha moment for me when Google DeepMind came out with AlphaGo, and when you saw that these models were capable of finding certain patterns in data that are not evident to human experts,
Hmm.
and you take that and you extrapolate that to different kinds of scientific domains and fields, the light bulb went off that hey, if this can happen in different scientific disciplines, this would be game changing. So the work that I do now is essentially I support this initiative called the Digital Future Initiative, which is led
Hmm.
by Google Australia. And the goal of that initiative is to make AI more accessible and more useful to scientists and researchers worldwide.
Cool.
And so we focus on a lot of awareness issues. We focus on building communities, creating education, creating resources, and just making all of these things that are happening in AI more accessible, more usable by scientists and researchers anywhere in the world.
Awesome. Well, that's incredible. And is it something that you feel like a lot of people, a lot of scientists have been interested in that program, or in the last 10 years, like it's getting more interest in that program? I mean, obviously having Google behind you is definitely a good marketing, name to help people out. But what's kind of the participation amounts of the scientists who are involved?
I think so. That's a great question. And science as a community is generally skeptical of any new flashy thing that comes around, and for
Yes.
good reasons, because you know science is a field that has a lot of rigor in it. There's a lot of focus on accuracy and truth and validation. And every new technology that comes around, it needs to go through that whole process of validation and making sure that it's actually useful and not harmful for what science is trying to do. So
Yeah.
I've seen the scientific community go through that cycle of skepticism. Is it really something that's going to be useful for us? What are the real world applications of these tools? But now what I'm seeing is that more and more scientists, more and more researchers, more and more postdoctoral students, and in early stage, early career researchers are seeing the potential impact of these tools. And more of them are building with AI, they're sharing what they're doing. So there's a growing sense of community of people who are working with AI tools in science. And a lot of those folks want to share what they're doing with each other. Uh, what I'm doing with Google as part of this Digital Future Initiative is one small part of it. But
Mm.
in my work, I work across communities, in the US, in Europe, in Australia, and I'm seeing similar kinds of trends and similar kind of community building happening everywhere where machine learning can be powerful for science.
Incredible, incredible. I love that. I mean, that's exactly kind of what we're doing on this podcast too, is just kind of building a community and education. So I love to hear that there's just so many worldwide initiatives because, at one point society is going to have to accept this research. And I think this is definitely a good start and a good way for the community of scientists to have a place to grow, share their expertise, share their failures, share their successes, and go from there. Yeah.
And I think if I could add to that, there's a new paradigm that's emerging where, see, if I'm a scientist, right, I don't have to now wait for a technology company to build me a tool that allows me to use AI in my work. Things are becoming so easy and so accessible that I, as a scientist, can now build my own pipelines and I can build my own AI-based systems that I want to deploy in my work. And I think that is the message that really needs to get across there, that in this new world that we are entering, everyone can be a developer.
Yeah.
Everyone can and should start building with AI, right? If you are working in the scientific community, don't wait for someone from IT or someone from technology to come and tell you that this is how you can use this new tool. You can start playing around with these APIs yourself. You can start building LLM-based agents yourself, and you can start doing things which were previously not possible. And the same
Mhm.
applies if you are in manufacturing, if you're in retail, if you're in any segment. I think the democratization of AI is very, very important. And I think more and more people need to become aware that it's becoming so easy to build these kinds of systems yourself now.
Exactly. So true. So true. I mean, even 10 years ago, 20 years ago, I mean, that was just, the start of like a CMS system there people could start building their own websites. And, here we are today building our own apps, our own tools, our own workflows. And I think that's just what's so incredible. It's that amazing fast pace that everything is going through, right? I mean, when we're
Yeah.
talking about, last 20 years, like I would say, what is the biggest breakthrough that's really been able to, fuel your research and like in AI and in ML, in these models?
So I really like to highlight three trends that I have seen in the advent of AI in science, I think, which have been very, very transformational. First is the realization that machine learning models have this predictive capacity that is over and above what human beings are capable of,
Mhm.
right? And I see that as a boon, that this extra intelligence that we now have available to us, which was not available before, that can be deployed to make predictions about the future. So a great example of that is protein folding. So AlphaFold, the model that DeepMind came out with, essentially what they did was they looked at this database called the protein database, PDB, which academic scientists had been using for a very, very long time to make predictions about how proteins would fold. And instead of trying to do some kind of symbolic logic to do that kind of prediction, what AlphaFold did was they trained the model to learn from that database, identify hidden patterns, and then make predictions, right? Now, if you take that simple concept and you apply it to any kind of natural sciences, be that weather forecasting, be that material design, be that quantum chemistry, right? You take a model, train it on existing physical data, and then use that to make predictions about what will happen next. That in itself is a powerful concept. And a lot of researchers realize that power of machine learning and AI based models almost 5, 6 years ago. But then there was a challenge that not everyone can build these kinds of models. Google was able to build something like AlphaFold because they have a lot of compute. They have
Mhm.
an amazing engineering talent that is available to them, right? And they had like leadership support to go ahead and invest time and money in building something like that. When I work across universities around the world, they are not that, they don't have those kinds of resources.
What's that?
Typically in a university, it's a really small department that is responsible for IT. They have a limited amount of resources. So it's very difficult for scientists and researchers who are working in academia to build these kinds of models. So the second trend that I started seeing, which started changing these things, is the advent of cloud computing, right? So, high performance computing, high levels of compute, GPUs, these kinds of things are becoming more accessible to researchers now through the use of cloud computing, right? So you don't have to go and create your own server farm, your own data center. You can use the GPUs you want to train your models for a fixed period of time. And then you can also start building these kinds of models, right? So
Yeah.
these two trends happened over the last 5 years. And then the final thing for me was the advent of large language models.
Yeah.
Because what was happening, Anya, was that, a lot of scientists who wanted to build these kinds of models, who had the expertise to build these kind of models, they were still not computer scientists, right? They were not machine learning engineers, right? So there was this gap that I'm a scientist, I want to do something with AI, but I don't have the technical knowledge to go and be able to do that. LLMs come in and fit beautifully in that gap because
Yeah.
now what can happen is I, as a scientist, can describe to my LLM agent that, hey, I'm working in genomics. I want to create this machine learning model that can be trained on genome sequence data. Here are the parameters. This is the data that I have. Go and do it. And now the LLM can go and build that environment and that model for you or help you through that whole step, right? So,
True.
in terms of assisting scientists in building better machine learning models, I think large language models are going to play a huge, huge role there. And I think the combination of these three things is what is really transformational for the impact of AI in science.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's something that even 5 years ago we couldn't even, I would say, imagine, just that amount of knowledge and the accessibility of different industries to go in and solve problems on their own, because maybe somebody isolated in an IT environment wouldn't even think of that as a problem. And now, everyone from scientists to, healthcare professionals to genetics to, even e-commerce and marketing, everyone has access to create their own models and create their own results. And it's just
Yeah.
really broadened, the use. I mean, some great use cases, also some horrible use cases, I'm sure. But end results I think healthcare is going to be a field that's very well impacted, and that we're going to see a lot of benefits in that field. But
Yeah,
yeah,
I think
yeah,
the other thing there is large language models and then things like ChatGPT and Gemini and all of these foundation models, they also increase the modalities in which you can interact with your computer.
true.
To give you an example, right? So if I, as a researcher, was trying to replicate the work of some other researcher in my field who has published a paper. Earlier, the process would be I would have to do a lot of literature review. I would have to read the papers. I would have to understand what the methods used in that paper were. Then I would work with some expert in the IT department to help me translate that method into a computational pipeline. Then
Yeah.
I would need someone's help to actually, put that computational pipeline in place and then reproduce that experiment. It was a months-long process.
Yeah.
I would encourage anyone listening to this podcast to go and try this out right now. Take any scientific paper that has been published, right, which uses machine learning or which uses AI, feed it to your favorite chat model, Claude or ChatGPT or Gemini, and just tell it that, hey, look, read this paper and replicate the computational method used in this paper. It will get you to 85% of the way
Yeah.
just by that simple prompt, right? The
Exactly.
amount of work that can save for a scientist who's trying to do something new is incredible. Like it's like years and years of work that can be saved by helping with these kinds of tasks that typically a researcher would have to spend a lot of time on. So I think that is going to be the beauty of these systems. But to your point, there's still a lot of work that needs to happen to make these systems reliable, safe, and especially to make them meet the rigorous standards of science. Because in your normal day-to-day life, you can use ChatGPT and Gemini and get an answer and it's okay. But in scientific research, and if something is going to be published in a paper, that information has to be completely accurate and hallucination free. And there's a lot of work that still needs to be done to get these systems to that point.
Yeah, and I'm sure, that's definitely something that's going to develop, in the future of, 1-0, no hallucinations, 100% accurate models, or no output. And I think, we're going towards that, maybe not for everyday use, but in that scientific setting, it's going to have to, for genetics, it's going to have to be that way. There's no other way. You
Yeah,
don't want incorrect diagnosis because of your, hallucinating models. So definitely. But I think there's, just a huge amount of hope in the community that it will be possible to build in that way. Yeah.
exactly. And I think that there's already some very interesting avenues, engineering avenues that are emerging that I think people have only just started exploring and then playing around with. That those are the avenues that will lead to these more trustable answers and more verifiable answers, right? So if you look at it this way, right now, a vanilla LLM, a ChatGPT or a Gemini, is essentially you take massive amounts of data, massive amount of compute, put it together, and see what happens, right? And that's where the hallucinations happen, but hallucinations happen for a reason. I think hallucinations are a part of the capabilities of the model. The fact that
Mhm.
it's not remembering everything by rote, but it's
Yeah.
creating these patterns in its latent space based on which it can put full concepts. But then the new emerging paradigms of engineering, the first one is retrieval augmented generation, right? We're hearing a lot about that, but it's
Yeah.
essentially it's an intelligent document retrieval system. And people have only started experimenting with this now, but there's so many ways that you can make that retrieval accurate, that you can improve the truthfulness of the responses that the models are coming with. And we have only just started scratching the surface there.
Yeah.
The second model of engineering that is emerging is what people call agentic workflows, or test time compute, chain of thought prompting. Right? Essentially, if you tell the model that think about your answer, are you sure you are telling the right answer?
Yeah.
Or before you answer, make a plan of how you would go about answering this question. Right?
Yeah.
Anything that you do to take a prompt and increase its size and add more context and more relevant information, that leads to better answers. So there's so much more that people can do in that space, right? And then the final engineering trend that I'm seeing is the usage of tools, right? So sometimes the large language model by itself is not sufficient to provide you a good answer, right?
Mhm.
Sometimes you might need the model to do some mathematical calculations. You might need the model to do some scientific libraries that it should use. So now you can take these models and connect them with the tools that can get you more accurate answers. So I
Yeah.
think across these three areas or these three paradigms of engineering that are emerging, we
Mhm.
have just started doing things, and there's so much more that can happen, and that will make these systems more robust and more trustable.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. How do you think, I would say that also the public sector just kind of accepting this research and accepting the science things, right now they're hesitant to accept because of that hallucinations, but also I should go look at the percentages. I think every day the percentage of people using ChatGPT and other large language models is just going up and up, in everyday use, right? So it's going to be really interesting to see how people are going to accept AI in their actual scientific research. Do you think they are starting to accept it now, in the public sector, or not yet?
Definitely. I see. I attend a lot of conferences and a lot of events
Yeah.
which are focused on public sector science. And then they bring together folks from universities, from funding agencies, from government bodies who are talking about these questions. And I think that there's definitely a broad-based realization now that this is coming, right? That this is not something that can be avoided and that we can look away from. This is a new modality of doing invention,
Yeah.
and it will get integrated in everything that we do. So the number of sessions that happen around AI on the topic of large language models is increasing, right? So there is definitely a lot of awareness and a lot of understanding now this is coming. But I think there's two schools of thought. One is that you can use these things, these models, as a tool for scientists and researchers. Take the example of reviewing scientific literature. On average, almost 50% of the time in the early stages of research, researchers and their students are going through the existing scientific literature in that field and trying to find concepts, trying to find contradictions that will then inform their future research direction. In that space itself, these models are completely transformational. Like I use this all the time for reviewing new papers, getting an understanding of what was new that was discovered in this particular field, and they do such a good job of synthesis and discovery, right?
Yeah.
So, and then similarly in computational assistance, right? You want to create computational pipelines for the research that you're doing. You can use these models as your assistant to help you step by step to get there, right? So if you think about these smaller tasks, these knowledge worker tasks,
Mhm.
that's where there's a lot of understanding and realization that these models can be very, very powerful. But
Yeah.
then, sometimes you hear these articles come out about the end-to-end scientist, an LLM-based scientist that can come up with its own hypothesis, it can do its own experiment, and then it can come up with the result, and then it will publish the paper for you as well, and then the paper will cost you $1.15 per paper, right?
Yeah.
When
Great.
those kinds of things come out, that's where researchers become skeptical. That
Yeah.
hey, hold your horses. Let's not go too far. The human in the loop, the human agency directing these models is still going to be very, very important.
Yeah.
Because think of it this way, Daniel. Like I gave you the example of AlphaFold, right? That can predict how protein structures will fold.
Hmm.
Just the prediction itself is not science. Just being able to say that, okay, if you have this sequence, this is the structure that will emerge, that is not science.
Yeah.
Science is saying it will emerge because of these reasons. So the cause and effect relationships between different scientific entities, that is what scientists do. Scientists tell stories about why this happened. And that is where the human intervention and the human involvement is still going to be very, very important. And humans and these kinds of models will need to work together to take science further.
Yeah, just a pause. I think that was the most beautiful way I've ever heard someone describe science. Like, that's just, yeah. Oh, just like that's super inspiring, I
I,
think. Yeah,
I, I
definitely.
really listen to Professor Dr. Stephen Wolfram. He talks about this a lot, and essentially he says that there's all of this irreducibility, things that are unknown around us in the universe, right? And that the job of human intellect is to look at all of this unknown and say that okay, this part makes sense to us. This is the story that we can tell about this part, and
Yeah.
those stories become science, right? With
Yeah.
the help of large language models and AI, essentially what's happening now is that we have a really powerful flashlight available to us so that we can now search a lot more in the unknown. But even then, deciding what is important to human beings, which stories are important to us, and what is relevant to us, that is still going to be the job of human scientists. I don't think any AI or machine learning model can replace that.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, no, I think that's a great way to just kind of end the story, and I love hearing that from you. Just like a quick last question: what is the most impactful thing that you think that AI can do for society? Just like a quick last little tidbit, and before we finish off the podcast.
So the reason I'm fascinated by this space and why I work here is because I think knowing things about our reality, knowing things about the universe, I think that's the most important function of humanity. Like understanding, what this universe is, how it functions, and why it exists. Maybe I think these are the kinds of questions that are most important for humanity as a collective to solve. And
Mhm.
I honestly feel that the advent of these new machine learning models, these new emergent capabilities, is a turbocharge, is a boost to that effort, right? But if used correctly, right?
Yeah.
If deployed in the right kind of way, if deployed in such a way that it meets the standards of science. I think science is a great way that humanity has created of answering big questions, and we need to make sure that AI fits into that system. So I think if done in the right way, this will just expand our horizons of knowledge. It will accelerate knowledge creation. It will make us more aware of what this universe is and our role in it.
Mm-hmm.
And in order for that to happen, the most important thing, Dania, that I think needs to happen is that the community of scientists and the community of technologists need to come together,
Yeah.
right? They cannot continue to work in silos anymore because now it's becoming so important that these things become integrated in everything. But it can only happen if science and technology work together and share ideas with each other, share restraints with each other, and help each other define what the future of AI and science will look like.
Definitely, definitely. I totally agree with you. I think, yeah, stronger together. I think all different fields, when you bring them together, more different minds definitely succeed better. And I think this is finally the time where we can kind of start merging the research aspect and the corporate aspect so that, long investments and funding that we get from the corporate aspect to the scientific research, that we can definitely start merging things together. Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us on AI Search. It was such a pleasure to talk to you. And I'm just really excited to share this with our audience. Yes.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you.